is the tie to points. And it's all related to people and feeling cared for. But I thought about the conference being kindness at work. I said, oh, I need the business examples, and I have plenty of those. And I said, kindness at work. Oh, it's the kindness within us at work, whether it's with a nonprofit or a shelter or business or a stranger we meet. It's always there. And so it's a little different way of thinking. So some of the things I'll have today are based on the book, Care, You Have the Power. A lot of the stories are in there. And I put together 10 tips on creating, for example, create a caring impression. But any of that, I'll be happy to send you if you send an email. Not the book, but any of those kinds of things. So what you're going to hear is a lot of stories, because that's what I have. And I've been asking people as I meet them, because I like to be current, what's important about kindness to you? So I called Yarnell's, it's a well-known auto shop locally, a lot of integrity, and said, my headlight's out. He said, come on, bring it in. I said, how much? He said, $28. I said, fine. So I go in there and I said, what do you think's important about kindness? And the owner, Mike, said, total honesty. So we had the guy take off my car and get it fixed up. He said, I can't charge you. I said, you can't charge me? He said, no, we need to help each other. I like what you're doing. So there's those little acts of kindness. So see if you can think of a time someone did something kind for you when you didn't expect it. You don't have to say it, but just to get in that mode of thinking about it. Or you did something kind for someone who didn't expect it. How did they feel? How did you feel? I know my older son, when he was working in a restaurant, went to a Taco Bell, and he said he met a couple of people from South America who opened a little taco shop. They didn't have any money to get around. So he didn't have money either, but he went to Walmart and bought them 2 bicycles. And he said he couldn't believe their reaction to doing something like that. So the opportunity to be kind could show up tomorrow. When I was working on finishing the book, because I collected a lot of stories about service from my business career, which I'll talk about later, but I kept hearing the word care. And when I finally was finishing the book, I had all the stories on the table and by chapters. And I told my son, Josh, who was 11 then, Josh, I got to write the 6 things down that people are supposed to do based on what the chapter says, because books do that, even though people don't do it. And he looked at me and said, Dad, don't talk to the reader. I was totally confused. What do you mean, Josh, don't talk to the reader? I'm finally get a book done? So a couple of years later, I don't know if you've heard, it's called The Last Lecture by Professor Randy Pausch, who was dying of cancer with 3 little kids at the time. I strongly recommend listening to The Last Lecture, because in his very poignant, emotional talk, which was about an hour in front of hundreds of people, one of the things he said was, don't tell people what to do. Tell them stories, and they'll see where it fits in their life. That's what Josh was trying to tell me. And Josh is now an EMT, fireman, works in the emergency room in Colorado. He's always had that wisdom. The other thing I remember him telling me when I was a little nervous before a talk, he said, Dad, you're supposed to be nervous. It's positive energy. I use that all the time. So enthusiasm is really important. We may not be feeling it. It certainly helps other people connect with us. And I mentioned earlier in another session the book, The Heart Speaks by Dr. Mimi Guarneri. She was a cardiologist who'd done about 700 stents, and she wanted to get to the core of what's really going on with people. So she studied it and opened an institute about it. And The Heart Speaks is about the heart has its own brain and it feeds the brain. And that's where a lot of the feelings come from. And we tie that with Dr. Bruce Lipton, the physicist who wrote The Biology of Belief. He talks about the cellular reaction to conditions around us. And I think the heart is right in the middle of all that. We just don't talk about it that way. We're hearing a lot about vaccinations. So they're starting to do them for over 75, over 65. I couldn't get through on the phones or the internet. It's not the fault of the hospital, of the organizations. I used to be in distribution. They foisted all these things on them that said, thousands of people are going to call you. Have your phones and call centers ready. They can't get ready in a week. But I did get through to Palo Alto Medical, which is part of Sutter Health. And I went in last week, and the person vetting the people coming in was smiling. We were in line. Another person was walking along, smiling and being friendly with everybody. We get to registration. They're smiling and being friendly. Then I went to where they give the vaccination. The guy was a surgery nurse, and he let me talk for 5 minutes. They were all so friendly. They were kind, and we feel good. And that comes because somebody higher up than them is creating that environment. There are many, many, many stories about that. In terms of listening, I like what the late Larry King was attributed to have said. I never learn when I'm talking. I'm guilty as charged on that one. So I want to talk about some of the care examples. They come from business. They come from working with nonprofits. They come with work with students. And I was going to write a book on service, but the word care started to pop in. And it's interesting, if I go to the East West bookstore, the Holistic Story here, or the one in Boulder, or the one in Santa Cruz, none of the trinkets have the word care on it. You can check that out when you go. It's loyalty, it's empathy, it's love. And I personally feel like care may be the most important word in the English language, because when people feel cared for, trust develops. So when I was hired as the customer service manager at Grid Systems, the name of the company, and they were bought out and moved like most of my companies, morale was terrible. People were overburdened, overworked. The sales even sent me an email that said, we're reluctant to give your number to the customers. That's not a good situation. So I started my recruiting. I go to the job fairs myself because I don't want human resources ruling out the people who don't have the degree or don't have the whatever. I want that enthusiasm. I want that caring for customers. So Dee Dee was a lady who walked up. She walked up to the booth, really enthusiastic. And I immediately put her resume in my pocket. The short version is she became the customer relations supervisor. 3 months later, the email from sales is, you guys have an organization other companies would die to have. And I know I heard Brian Byro talked about yesterday, 24% of employees are really committed. I can tell you in my organization, it was closer to 100%. And one of the examples of that is, we got a call from Chicago that said they were doing a major laptop demonstration against a top competitor at that time, Toshiba. And 6 of the 12 did not work in the demonstration. That usually means game over. So they called me and said, what can you do? Well, we didn't have 6 computers. One of the guys went to the repair center. Somebody went and took some off desks. And that night, 6 computers got mailed to Chicago and picked up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And the next day, all 12 worked. The customer didn't even want to talk to the competition after that because they saw that kind of response. The email from the vice president of sales said, God bless those who care. Vice presidents of sales don't usually talk like that. A lot of the work I've done has been with shelters, ladies coming to recovery programs, or veterans coming out of mental health clinics in the last few years, because I got laid off enough times and all that I had to do something else to use those skills. And 2 stories from that. One was at House of Grace. It's ladies who were there for a year. They've been abused or drugs or alcohol, and they go through the year program. And after 6 months, they can look for a job. So I got brought in to do a session. I'm going, there's 27 women. Do you think I knew what to do? Are you kidding me? I know the data, but they don't want the boring data. So the third lady asked the question. I said, oh, that's a great question. Would you come up front of the room? Because I wanted her to feel the support of the audience. And I was kind of a novice at it in those days, but it seemed right. So she finally came up front, and we talked for about 5 minutes. I don't remember what we talked about. I do know she started crying. I got the biggest bear hug of my life. That was another lesson for me. Until we get that trust, we're not moving to step two. And in the guys division, one of the guys got up and spoke. I said, "What made you get up and speak in front of all these people you didn't know?" He said, "I felt like you guys cared about me. I thought I could trust you." So that was the factor. The other one was a group called Dress for Success. It's another ladies group coming through challenging situations who go to seminars about once a month. And I went and watched the month before, and the speaker was unfortunately pretty boring, and people were playing on their phones. And so I knew I had to really do something to connect. So I went in and I started talking, and I looked out in the third row. There was this lady with a wonderful smile. The smile makes such a difference. I don't have to tell anybody that. We know that. We just don't use it enough. So I asked her to come up front because I wanted other people to see how they felt when she smiled. And she came up with that wonderful smile, and they smiled, and she leaned over and whispered at me in her dialect, "But you don't understand me." I said, "I do understand you." And she said, "No, you don't." Those are those moments when I don't know what to do. So I looked out at the audience, about 27 ladies. I said, "Did anybody else understand her?" Every hand went up. Her face changed. It may have been the first time she's ever been felt speaking English to a group of people. And that's where that heart speak stuff comes in, because there's a cellular reaction within us when that happens. And it's very deep, and it really connects. A couple of examples from the business world that tie to we say we need the support from the top. And I know I have great examples. Hal Rosenbluth in his book, The Customer Comes Second, talks about the people coming first. There are a lot of stories like that. But most organizations, the top of the organization is not supporting what we're talking about. And can individuals still have an impact? The answer is yes. They may take a risk. I know at Apple Computer, I was a fairly new manager in an internal support organization. And I got to know my people a little bit. By the way, if people are working for you, you're working with them, find out when their birthday is. What are their kids' names? Make it personal. I don't mean go to 200 people on the manufacturing line, but to the degree we can make it personal, it does make a difference. So Judy came up to me. I knew she had a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, and she said, "My son's homesick today." And I said, "Wait a minute, your son's homesick. He's 6 years old? Who's taking care of him?" She said, "Oh, he'll be fine." I knew intuitively she was afraid she's going to lose her job. So I looked at her and said, "The only way you'll lose your job around me is if you don't go home and be with your kid." Now, I didn't learn that in the training manuals or the policy manuals. In fact, I used to tell our service people, you want to lose your job, use the word policy with the customer. Banks are different. Anyway, her motivation after being cared for like that, which was already good, got even better. You could see even more enthusiasm just from a simple act. When I was working at a company called My Team, again, I was a customer service manager, and I hired most of the people. Like a typical situation is Rosa came in, and I was in charge of the email response system. My boss said, "If you don't find somebody to handle that, you got to handle it." So I was feeling desperate. So Rosa came in. She was a geophysicist from Berkeley, UC Berkeley. I said, if she could be a geophysicist and climb mountains, she can handle an email system. So do you have any experience with that? She said no. Within 3 months, she knew more than the customers about their email system. So it takes a risk, and that's what I hate to pick on HR, but I will. Most HR departments don't do. So we don't even get to see those people. Most, as I alluded to earlier, over the last couple of years, we're working with high school students on both sides of the freeway here. We have the challenged side, East Palo Alto, and the little more affluent side. Because I've been doing some volunteer work in East Palo Alto, the principal at Oxford Day Academy, it was a new high school. She said, "Can you help our young ladies who are terrified of speaking? And I can't pay you." I said, "Well, welcome to the club." How can you say no? And I did need the money. So I went in the first session. There were about 10 young ladies around the table. Here comes this old guy with the gray hair, like they're going to go, oh, yeah, I trust you. No way. It took 3 weeks to get Karen, who's now written about, to even speak up. Because the English teacher gave them an assignment called How I Got Out of the Cage, How I Overcame Something. I said, good, that's what we'll practice here. When Karen told her story of overcoming bullying in another school, I almost fell out of my chair. It was so powerful. The short version, 3 months later, she was one of 4 California students selected. I get emotional thinking about her. She spoke to 450 educators about what kids need. And she really put it out there. We're the kids, we're the future. See, it's in people. It's always in people. It ties to one of the young ladies at Palo Alto High School asked me, she said, Mr. Temes, where'd you learn this stuff? My ego wanted to say, oh, the shelters, the corporate world, the this, the that. And then the spiritual part kicked in, and what came out was, look, there's a star in you. Let's bring it out together. And that's the work I was meant to do. I mentioned that to another lady who runs a shelter program, and she said, can I use that line with my ladies? I said, yeah, as long as you let me help. So another example from the school where Karen was at was the principal was in the hallway with the kids going in to do their speaking in front of the class. And I could see she was with a boy and a couple other teachers, and the boy was crying. She saw me walking down the hall and said, hey, Ivan, can you help? I said, what, help with what? I didn't even know what they were doing. So I saw what was going on, and I went into the room with the boy. And he was terrified. And I know I couldn't push through his fears because the fears are that real. People have to experience it, or at least allow them to be there. Finally, I came up with something. I said, how about I'll introduce you to the class. You speak from the hall. Anybody ever done that? I've never seen that done. So after it took 10 minutes, he finally said, oh, okay, as long as I stay in the hall. So I went in the room and introduced him, about 25 students, and asked him to be compassionate. And he started speaking from the hall. Then he walked into the room and started speaking. Whatever he went through, his whole life changed because I saw him subsequently to that. But none of that happens unless people feel like you care about them at the level of where they are and who they are. I'm going to tap that to listening. Eckhart Tolle has a quote. I'm going to read it here. Most people are so distracted by their thoughts, so identified by the noises in their heads, they can no longer feel the aliveness within themselves. In a couple of quotes in my book, one from Oprah, one from Professor Hollowell said that Oprah is having intimate connections with the people we love has never been more of a challenge. While cell phones, beepers, email, the internet make communication faster and more efficient, they also diminish the number of meaningful face-to-face interactions we have. I often tell people losing Facebook, why don't you pick up the phone and call somebody? Especially somebody could use the call. And Professor Ed Hollowell, who's out of Boston, he talked about the disappearance of the human moment. He said the human moment has started to disappear in modern life. We may soon discover the power of its absence. Distrust and dissatisfaction they're contagious. We see a deficiency of human contact via body language, tone, and facial expressions. He's maybe the leading person in the United States in dealing with kids with ADHD. So he doesn't believe that stuff. He was just warning it. And one of the places I went to that he's been involved with is called College of Adaptive Arts in San Jose. They only work with kids who can be a very serious ADD or ADHD or autism. And the kids have a public speaking class. And I got to visit, I got to help a little bit. And sometimes they'll make a mistake. And they just go right on as if there was no mistake. And I did a lot of sessions with an Asian organization, Asian school, where they are not going to make a mistake no matter what. because that's the culture, as it is with other cultures. So I said, how do I take what I learned from those kids with autism to places with other people where the fear so much gets in the way? So back on the listening point, Josh, my same son who I've mentioned, my great trainer, again, he was about 11 when I said, I'm a little concerned about a talk, I'm nervous. He said, Dad, you're supposed to be nervous. It's positive energy. What? So I've often used that. I was at East Palo Alto had a big meeting where kids were speaking in front of 200 people, and I'm standing next to a young lady who was terrified, very smart, very attractive, very sensitive, but she was terrified. Again, I don't know what to do. I looked at her based on Josh's training and said, you do sports, right? Yeah. You do music, right? Yeah. You have a sense of anticipation before that? Yeah. So what's different about this? Other than it's the fear that blocks it. So the way I train people when I do that is to get out in front of the group, get centered, connect with people. So she goes out in front of 200 people and she just throws her arms in the air and said, how you doing, everybody? That was perfect for her. She didn't let that fear block her, which it often does. In fact, on the public speaking mantra, whatever the statistics are, if you look them up, it says 90% of people or 80% are afraid. I'm saying nobody's afraid of public speaking. I don't know if you've ever heard anybody say that. I made it up. I think what they're afraid of is I'm not going to make a mistake and I'm not going to be embarrassed. And you can work with that. So Brian Byer was on yesterday, and I heard Brian speak about 20 years ago. I'm going to use the shorter version of one of the stories about his daughter, Jenna. He talked in the story that I heard, he talked about he's having to leave home all the time. And his daughter, Jenna, who was about 4, said, Daddy, I want to see you, like that. He said, I'll play with you as soon as I get back. So when he gets back, he's down on the floor with Jenna, playing with her, or so he thought. And he said, Jenna, isn't this great? I'm here with you. And she looked at him and said, Daddy, you're not here with me. You're on the telephone. And he tells the story about his whole life changed after that. He never missed a kid's activity in any way, shape, or form, no matter what was going on. I think another one on listening, I like to use these quotes. Naomi Remen said, when you listen generously to others, they can hear the truth in themselves, sometimes for the first time. And Carrie Lake has a book, Listen Like a Horse. She's raised with animals. And she said, horses don't have judgments. They're just there. So I thought about that. How do I work with judgments? Because I know I have judgments. People have judgments. So what I'll tell the kids is when you see me, you have a thought, right? It can seem like a judgment. It's just a thought. Right behind that's the judgment, and you've got complete control over that. Like, there's the guy with the gray hair. What does he know? Well, have your thought, and then listen. And I forget that sometimes. I'll throw a little kindness in here. I was at the bookstore yesterday. There's this great little children's book. It says, the title is Kindness Rules. And I opened up, the second page had about every tip you'd ever need about kindness in a little children's book. So Mari-Lyn, you've assisted me in discovering a lot of those things. One of the quotes from Jonathan Sacks and From Optimism to Hope is, acts of kindness never die. They linger in the memory, giving life to other acts in return. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, a person should always be careful in the way he formulates his responses. Be not so quick to be negative. Keep loving. Trust. We talked a little about trust. When people trusted me in some of that work, it made a difference. Corporate world, not corporate world. Again, at the East Palo Alto group, Street Code Academy, the founder 6 years ago said, can you work with these two 13-year-olds and a 14-year-old? They're going to present their products at Stanford, of all places, with adults and teenagers. I did my best. They effectively wouldn't even listen to me. At some level, they did. Guess who won first prize presenting their technical product at Stanford? The little 13-year-olds and the 14-year-old, because they didn't just present their product. They looked at the audience. They were cute. They connected, and people felt it. It's not in our head. It may be partly in our head, but it's in our heart. That's why I mentioned earlier, I love Hal Rosenbluth when he built, in the book, The Customer Comes Second, he talked about his organization, and I talked to him, and the people come first. Bill Campbell, the late vice president of sales at Apple Computer, because again, I worked in another support organization that was closed when the company restructured. One of the things he said, you want to find good people? Walk the halls. Except I was already doing that. When I had started my support organization, I knew I needed people with experience because it was MIS, IT, which has got a certain tag about it that they don't know the business sometimes. So I go in the inventory department. There's this young lady named Carol sitting behind her desk. She's attractive. People tried to hit on her a lot, I imagine. And she gave me one of these, who are you looks? What do you want? And I explained I was looking for people with experience to work in my group. And she politely said, no, that's not what I want to do. A month later, she came to me and said, I think I would like to work in another department. So she brought us instant expertise. When we did inventories with their department, they knew we understood their part of the business because we had Carol. Carol went on to become an Apple product manager in New Zealand and married somebody and lives there now. But about a year after I met her, I said, you know that funny look you gave me the first time I met you? What was that? She said, I couldn't believe somebody cared enough to give me another chance. She wasn't acting that way. She was acting with a stiff demeanor. It's about 6 years ago. Palo Alto High School is on the more side of the freeway where people were a lot better off. And the teacher said to a friend of mine, why don't you come in and do a session on, she called it speaking in confidence. So I went in. I've now been there 7 times. That's what I so missed doing the last year. I have 262 letters from the kids. I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs. Well, this is what one of the things the teacher said. As always, my students were profoundly impacted by your visit. They expressed deep appreciation for how human you made the learning environment. They felt respected and seen by you. They developed closer relationships with one another, and they realized how speaking to an audience in a conversational way is incredibly powerful. Your time with my students always jumpstarts their ability to trust one another and build a classroom community that feels safe and encouraging. They didn't know each other. See, I didn't know what we were doing is building community. And when I went back and visited when they did their talks, because she's a great teacher, it was so positive the way in which they supported each other. Let my ego speak here. One of the other young ladies said, listening to you speak on Friday was incredible. I find it harder and harder these days to meet an adult who is so naturally willing to educate teenagers in a way that really resonates with us. I enjoyed listening to your kind-hearted sense of humor and very much like how you incorporated students from the class into your examples. See, they won't volunteer, but by the end of an hour, I will have had 10 volunteers. And how do you be compassionate and kind and still give feedback that might not seem positive? Well, you do it with honesty. One of the girls got up and talked about her. I got her up. She was in the back row. I said, you sit in the back row, you're coming up. She had a real passion for animals and talked about it. But there was no excitement in her voice. I looked and said, you probably really enjoyed this. She just said, yeah, I do. So I asked her to repeat a couple of sentences, but let me hear some enthusiasm. And she did it. And she said, gee, I've never felt that way before. She was scared to let go of it for fear of being judged. And we have to somehow find a way to do it. One other comment I wanted to make on that. Oh. One of the students, you were funny, but you also made everyone in the room feel as though they were cared for and listened to. And that's no simple task. So, connected or not connected, whether it's corporate or nonprofits or any other situation, people need to feel cared for. And when I first worked with the kids in East Palo Alto, these are all kids of color, I would say something like, I guess you're wondering who the old guy with the gray hair is. That's me. So they'd smile. But as I got to know them better and to know the environment over the last 7 or 8 years, kids from challenging backgrounds in about 15 seconds know if you're being authentic or not. I don't know how they know. I haven't read that book. They know. So I don't have to kid around. I just have to be honest and do what I think works. So I went through a bit of homelessness the last couple of years. Where do you think I learned this stuff? I had lived with the family in Campbell for 2 years. It was supposed to be 6 months. It was time to move. So a lady named Hallie Crum started Retraining the Village, East Palo Alto. Retraining the Village is a home for people coming out of prison or who have been homeless from the military. And she said, well, I can give you a room. They were sleeping 3 to a room. So she gave me this tiny little room as like a closet. And I was there for a few months. But we're helping the guys find jobs. I mean, seeing people wanting to rebuild their lives coming out of those situations would have been a concept to me if I hadn't lived some of it. So I finally found a home in the Upper Hills with a lady who had 3 dogs. And I thought, hey, this is for life. I'm old. I could die here someday. But after a few months, it wasn't working out. I heard the garbage trucks one morning. And went out front, it was more than the garbage trucks. It was also a tow truck towing my car away. I had been working with a finance company. Apparently, the lady who I worked with had quit and not communicated some stuff. So there it went. And then I'm somewhere that same afternoon, and she sends me an email, said, she wasn't even there at the time. You know, I don't feel comfortable having someone's car towed, so here's your eviction notice. You got 3 days. So I got no car, no place to live. Talk about seeing the kindness in other people. One of my friends sent an email out to her congregation. Now I'm driving a 2006 Honda CR-V for monthly payments that has 50,000 less miles than my car that got towed. And I wasn't sure where I was going to live. On New Year's Eve, when I was about to go find the veterans shelter, I get an email from a psychiatrist who said, I got an extra couch in the room. You could stay there. So I wound up there for 5 months. Then it was time to move. And they have something called HUD-VASH. It's if you're a veteran and you go to classes and you qualify. The senior psychiatrist there who I'd worked with helping her people find jobs said, listen, you dummy, you don't have much money. Why don't you apply for some of these programs? So I did qualify for HUD-VASH. So I called them up when I had no place to live, and they gave me a motel for a month in the middle of COVID. And the HUD-VASH came through so I could get a place to live, but it looked like South San Jose because there's a certain price limitation how much they'll support. The short version is I'm now living in a 1-bedroom in a nice area of Palo Alto through a series of miracles that happened, like a 54-page lease document, an 18-page signing agreement. And my friend Sherry sent an email out, hey, if you got some furniture, I know it's a veteran who could use a little bit. I got at least 25 emails. One of the groups who worked with veteran came up the stairs with my new free queen bed. Another group came up with my new free dining table and couch. And I looked around the room. Pretty soon I was referring folks to other people and said, I can't use your wonderful vinyl couch. Maybe so-and-so can. So, see, my perspective is that goodness is within so many people, and yet that's not what we see in the headlines. And by the way, I started out life as a sports writer, so I kind of know about how the newspapers work. In the spiritual aspect for me, too, is about 10 years ago, I went in for hernia surgery, and something went wrong. I mean, really wrong. I basically died on the table in an anaphylactic reaction. They put me in a medical coma, which I was in for over a week, and then a couple months of recovery, learning to walk and all that. So I'm really lucky to be here. And I'm meant to do the work with the kids. And that's my commitment. Another thing I want to say, I know I'm skipping around about people, is what lies before us and what lies behind us are small matters compared to what lies within us. It's within everyone, and I know you guys know that. So I wrote up what I call the CARE formula for success, which I'm happy to send out a copy. If you email me, ivan@ivantemes.com, you can have any documents I got. The first one is, I feel listened to. Second one is, you told me the truth. Third, you care about me. Fourth, I trust you. The fifth was really important because in my organizations, the loyalty, people didn't quit. I mean, they almost never quit. Sometimes I wanted them to quit to find a better job. I am loyal to you. I will be responsible in my dealings with you. I want to do my best for you while we are together. So how do you keep people motivated when the organization is changing and going to move on and all that nonsense is going on? But it's the while we are together, how do we get the best out of people? So I'm just looking to see which other things I might want to cover. I asked one of the high school girls yesterday. I was randomly walking down the street, and a couple of girls had this big smile, and I interrupt the way I interrupt with the mask on, ask them about kindness, and she said, "It's random bridges we're building with each other." I like that. Random bridges we're building with each other through our kindness. And let me do one of the business ones before I close. Service organizations are often maligned because people don't know what they're really doing and they've got too much to do. Again, one of my Apple stories is I got there and it wasn't real positive in our organization. One of the guys designed a t-shirt because Apple was big on t-shirts. It's about $3. It was a really good t-shirt. Everybody wanted the t-shirt. The only way you could get that t-shirt was to come back in the organization and spend an hour on the phones with the people there doing what they were doing. It didn't matter if it was my boss or it was a customer. My boss left with his tail hanging between his legs because he had no idea all that was really going on. And if you've seen the show Undercover Boss, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You guys want to ask any questions? Nope. I'll keep going a little bit more. I mean, so much of it's common sense. Here's 3 quotes from the book. I love these quotes. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Society is always taken by surprise by any new example of common sense. Confucius. Life is really simple and we insist on making it complex. This is for Gina, from Warren Buffett. The business schools reward complex behavior more than simple behavior. Simple behavior is more effective. One last corporate one from Hannah Kane. Hannah is the CEO of Alum Technology. She's from Denmark and Fremont. She's won beaucoup national awards as a woman entrepreneur. And you walk into her building, you can immediately feel something's positive here. But Hannah, as good as she is, says, I got to keep learning too. So she went to a conference. And what she learned there is, how do you go from committing small murders to caring? She talks about a small murder is committed when the CEO hurriedly passes by the receptionist while deep in thought and does not make eye contact. or when a thank you or small recognition is not made, or when you criticize someone in public. And so often that happens in the corporate world, we or others get so busy, we forget to connect with the people who are there supporting us every day. Rick LeBlanc's a company in Chicago. He's a CEO, and his story is, I always walk through the back door in manufacturing, and I stop and talk to the people. Then he'd go to his office. Those same people are in his office telling him what's going on. He doesn't need some HR survey that nobody ever acts on anyway in most cases. I'm picking on HR again. He knows what's going on because his people come and tell him, because they feel safe, because they know he cares, because he doesn't say, I got no time, I'm the CEO. He takes the time. My daughter Kelly, who I can't talk about her, but she's not on the call. I'm going to close with this one. It's about shy, because a lot of times I hear people say my kid's shy. When she was 12, I told the minister, Kelly's kind of shy. And he looked at me and said, she's not shy, she's just quiet. So her path, she went on to UC San Diego on the crew team, 5 a.m. every morning for 4 years. And she won the award as a senior for the person most inspiring to keep the freshmen wanting to do what they do well. Then she went to France, and she found the money to do it, to study abroad for a year, and her French was pretty good. A student knocked on her door one night and said, Kelly, can you help me with my English? She said that changed her whole life. She really wanted to do that work with immigrants, which he had also done in San Diego. So she came back and said, Dad, I'm going to law school. Don't talk me out of it. I talk you out of it. We never even talked about it. She meant, I know you don't have the money. So she gets into USF Law School, where she went for 3 years. But the first year she called me and said, Dad, I got a new nickname. Oh, really? It feels good that your daughter's willing to talk to you in your 20s, let alone get into detail. She said, my new nickname's the Silent Assassin. See, there is no shy. There's that word, and people appear that way, and they are that way. But when parents say their kid's shy, I don't want the kids thinking that's something bad or negative. It's what it is. So from my making a mistake saying she was shy to becoming Silent Assassin was a big change. And she worked in the bookstore all 4 years in high school. So as an attorney working in healthcare and immigration, she keeps winning national service awards. And her bosses are people who were military people in Afghanistan, who were colonels. And she keeps getting those awards because of what she did in the bookstore. So it's up to me to stay out of the way. And it's up to us to stay out of the way and support each other to the extent we can in our organizations. Or we may meet somebody this afternoon. So God willing, I'll be able to get back to doing more with this work with the kids as the pandemic hopefully subsides some. So thank you very much. Any questions, I'm willing to answer.
Thank you so much, Ivan. That was a great, great talk. I loved your stories. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love that too, Ivan. I'm so touched by it. It reminded me, I mean, I love that you picked the word care. Mm-hmm. I think and I hope that's where we're heading. And I want to share a book with you because, as I said, I think this conference is just so great that we come together, and because sometimes we think about these things and we want to work to make them happen, and we feel kind of lonely out there. And I think this is a book that has helped me align with what you said, which is called The Real Wealth of Nations, Creating a Caring Economics. And there is another one that is not as, it talks about caring, but not as directly, which is called The Great Turning. And these are all books about, and I think it relates to Gina's work on unconscious capitalism, is how are we going about being with each other and creating life for one another and for the planet. And I think what is coming up and what is becoming more and more clear to us is that what we have right now is not working. It's making people stressed and sick and homeless and not willing to help one another because they're just so crushed trying to survive. And it's, I mean, I'm really in awe of your willingness to show up for kids from where you are. It's just so inspiring. Like my heart is shaking. So I just want to say thank you and just keep doing what you do because it's beautiful. It's such a role model.
Thank you. By the way, here's that sign I mentioned. The only thing that matters are matters of the heart.
I love that, Ivan. Thank you so much for sharing your beautiful stories. I
Well,
also
you make me feel
thank you
in-
for your service. You know, my son is a Marine and he's a firefighter out in San Diego, and I do a lot of work with veterans. So I will send you an email. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. And thank you for your years of service.
Thank you very much. I so much want to do more or support you, who you don't seem to need that support.
Oh, we all need support, for sure.
You guys make me want to get married again.
Ivan, I'm curious, you mentioned that your daughter does immigration law, among other things. What aspect?
Well, thanks for asking. Right now, she's mostly focused on healthcare because that's her company. When she was at UC San Diego doing a lot of her pro bono work, it was working with people coming to this country and getting acclimated and learning about all the issues they were going through. She's not actually practicing that law now. It's a healthcare company. But one of the cute stories is she would do things for the folks as a volunteer. And one of the ladies from the Middle East made a little ring for her because they didn't have money. And then she called and said, "Hey, Dad, would you help me with my resume?" I said, "Daughter, you teach that class." I said, "The dad, you'll make it look wow." But yeah, she wants to do more of that, but bless her heart, she's at least got a good job with a good company.
Yeah, I've been